The new HBO series called Chernobyl is truly terrifying and shocking. Many of you might have questions about the series and the Chernobyl disaster, and I have plenty of them too, and that's why I went to the exclusion zone in Ukraine to see Chernobyl and Pripyat on my own. Hi, my name is Jeremy, and this is not a regular OSSA video. This is our documentary series about the Chernobyl disaster. We'll show you the differences between the HBO show and reality, how Chernobyl and Pripyat look nowadays. We'll answer the question of whether it is dangerous here, who lives in the exclusion zone now, and many, many more. I'll try to find the answers to all the questions you might have about the world's biggest nuclear disaster. Buckle up. In the HBO series, we see a city called Pripyat. This is a real city that was founded in 1970 for workers of the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant. In 1985, Pripyat had a population of 47,500 people. But today the city has been totally abandoned, and my journey starts here. The city is completely empty and entirely covered by tall grass and trees. Being here and realizing that 33 years ago this was one of the most beautiful and prosperous cities in the USSR is an eerie feeling. According to the HBO series, the Soviet government started evacuating the population from Pripyat on April 28th. That was more than 24 hours after the explosion, and the entire city continued to function for a whole day. Even the kids went to school as if it were a normal day. Did it really happen like that? Unfortunately, the answer is yes, it did. In the very first reports about the accident, it was clearly stated that there was no need to adopt any special measures or evacuations for people from Pripyat. However, on the morning of April 28th, radiation levels set off alarms at the Forsmark nuclear power plant in Sweden, over 1,000 kilometers from the Chernobyl power plant. It's partly because of that the Soviet Union couldn't cover up the massive scale of the disaster. So the radiation level at this point seems just fine, about as much as it would be in any major city like New York or Los Angeles. For now, there seems to be nothing to worry about. This exposure of robotic equipment takes me back to the HBO series, to the episode where robots were used to clean up the nuclear waste. You might remember the scene where a German robot called Joker was used to work on the rooftop of the nuclear plant to remove the rubble. However, it died almost immediately due to radiation exposure. So did any of these things happen for real? Indeed, it happened. Series creator Craig Mazin explored this question pretty deeply. Here's what he says. The Soviets, and this is mind-blowing to me, they refused to tell anyone how bad the situation was. Even then, months later, after the world knew about Chernobyl and knew what it meant, they were still soft-pedaling just how bad it was, to the point where they refused to tell the West Germans how much radiation was on that roof. It was 600% or 700% more than Joker could handle. And what blows my mind is the Soviet power system thought that that was okay. Why not? Let's just see. It's the same kind of attitude that leads to Chernobyl in the first place. However, the Joker is not at this exhibition due to its high level of radioactivity. It's actually located at Buryakovka, which is a special containment zone where other polluted equipment is stored. Buryakovka is an endless field of helicopters, trucks, bulldozers, and other machinery. Besides the Joker, the Chernobyl Liquidators used lunar rovers, or lunohods, that were specially modified for the purpose of stemming this crisis. But the radiation levels were so high that the robots couldn't function. Only humans could remove the waste. Workers weren't allowed to be on the roof for more than 90 seconds when cleaning up the radioactive materials. There are some real shots that show us what the process was like. Seems like HBO paid great attention to detail when depicting this process. These scenes look almost like a documentary about the process of cleaning up the reactor's roof. All right behind me is a monument to the heroes of Chernobyl. Right here we've got the firefighters who doused the flames to prevent a second explosion, which would have killed basically all of Europe. And on the right side of me, you can see the divers who drained the waters that would have become a thermal explosion. It's a rather humble monument, but we have these guys to thank for basically Europe's existence. Let's start with this question. Was there a fire on the roof? We see in the HBO show that reactor number 4 is on fire. There were lots of firefighters and other liquidators who helped them, and everyone was afraid that fire would spread to the other reactors and believed that it had to be stopped by any means necessary. However, that isn't quite true. There was indeed a fire, but it wasn't on the roof. That's what Alexei Breus, one of the liquidators who was there on that night, says. They stopped all the smaller fires fairly quickly and then went on to try and extinguish the smoldering hot reactor. But their efforts were useless because no matter how strong the water supply was, they just couldn't get it inside the power plant. The heat was already too extreme at that point, and the water was instantly turning to steam. All those people who tried so hard to extinguish the flaming hot reactor died heroic deaths. And the reason they died was because of another irresponsible order from the Soviet government. And the story behind Vasily Ignatenko, the firefighter whose pregnant wife visited him in a Moscow hospital, is all true. The same is true of the story of his wife and her child, who died not long after being born. All right, so this is a memorial to the firefighters and liquidators you might recognize from the HBO series. This is Vasily Ignatenko. Another element that was added by the HBO series was the black smoke that was coming out of the reactor. Eyewitnesses say that there was no smoke even on the day after the explosion. However, that was something that the HBO creators used to strengthen the storytelling. How else would you depict something invisible and dangerous like radiation without the help of smoke coming out of the burning reactor? And of birds that fell out of the sky and died because of it, that is completely true, by the way. Birds did really die from radiation exposure, and even the color of the birds was 100% accurate, because black feathers absorb radiation more than any other color. We're coming closer to the nuclear power plant. This is the disaster area where it all happened, right here. Right now the radiation level looks safe. That said, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but let's get a little bit closer before we go. Footage of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant was actually filmed in Lithuania, which has reactors of the same type. However, some shots of the power plant and reactor and surrounding areas were computer-generated models. Those models were originally made for another Chernobyl series called Moths, and HBO used them as a model. If you look at Chernobyl reactor number 4 today, you will see a huge construction called the New Safe Confinement or New Shelter. It was designed to confine the remains of the reactor. It also enclosed the previous concrete containment facility that was built right after the disaster. In the next part of our series, we'll talk about the Chernobyl New Shelter construction, how it was built, and whether there is a risk that it won't prevent radiation exposure. You might remember a powerful scene where a helicopter flies into the black smoke, and in just a matter of minutes, it falls to the ground. Did that happen for real? Or was it more a fiction from HBO? Partial fiction, I would say. The helicopter did indeed crash, but it happened in October of 1986, not in April. It was on a mission to fill the reactor with water in order to stop the spreading of radioactive dust. Unfortunately, the helicopter's blades were caught in the cables of a crane, and that's what caused it to crash near reactor number 4. Aside from the machines, robots, firefighters, and liquidators on the roof, there were also other heroic workers who helped to lessen the horrible consequences of the disaster. There were several scenes in the HBO show about the divers who agreed to go down into the flooded chambers of the reactor in order to prevent a possibly massive explosion. And the depiction of their story was also partially accurate. There could have indeed been a horrible explosion that would have affected a large part of Europe, and it was thanks to the divers that it was completely prevented. However, the way the men were selected for the suicide mission was not so accurate. Nobody actually had a meeting to find volunteers. It was, in fact, a rather classic example of Soviets giving orders. 3 men were needed for the mission. Mr. Ananenko, Mr. Bezpalov, and Mr. Baranov were on shift, and that's how they were actually selected. They did in fact have to go into a pitch-black environment beneath a badly damaged molten reactor that was slowly burning its way down to them. By most estimates, had they not averted a second explosion, half of Europe would have been wiped out. One of the heroic plant workers died in 2005, and the other 2 are still alive today. Next, we go to see the story of the miners, whose job was to dig a tunnel under the reactor to prevent the possible downward movement of the radioactive elements. If any part of them got into the groundwater, well, we can only imagine how horrible the consequences would have been. And the miners paid a hefty price for their heroics. Were the miners really working in the nude? It was indeed very hot there, and some of them at least got undressed. They didn't all get completely naked, but it is thought that maybe some of them did. So in your estimation, how accurate is the HBO series?
It is quite accurate, yes. They have used a lot of information. It is not a fake information, it is true. Maybe just some details.
In our first episode, to sum up, it's fair to say that the HBO show seems mostly accurate, if not completely. The main thing is that the Chernobyl disaster was depicted with great respect to all the people who passed away and suffered, and to those who sacrificed themselves to stem the nuclear consequences. Stay tuned to watch our next episode, where a Chernobyl expert answers the most Googled questions about the exclusion zone and radiation. When will Chernobyl stop being radioactive? How many people have died after the disaster? Why can animals still live there? What does radiation taste like? And many, many more. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to OSSA channel so you won't miss our next Chernobyl series.